In this video, we're going to dive into the Contact Starter solution that's part of the installation that comes with FileMaker Pro 14. Now, the Contact Starter solution also comes with your free installation of FileMaker Go 14 for your iPhone and iPad. So it's also going to be on your mobile device as well as your installed copy of FileMaker Pro. Now, the purpose of this video is for new FileMaker users to get some experience in learning how FileMaker works under the hood. And maybe also for some intermediate FileMaker users who want to see some alternate or different techniques as to how to build a FileMaker solution. Now, to really understand the mindset behind the Contact Starter solution, I went and talked to Nicholas Hunter, the chief architect behind the solution and a FileMaker employee in Santa Clara, California. Now, to be clear, this starter solution is a culmination of the efforts of a number of different people at FileMaker Incorporated. All sorts of people, from Nick to the quality assurance folks to feedback from product management, even folks within the engineering groups, have all offered feedback and contributions to make this solution what it is. Now, first off, the Contact Starter solution is a single table file. That means there's only one table within this file. Structurally, it's as simple as it gets. In terms of the relational graph, there's only one table occurrence on the graph as well. So there actually are no relationships wired into this FileMaker file. So it's a single table with no relationships. But it's actually pretty sophisticated given all that. And let me show you what I mean. First off, I want to point out that this solution supports separate layouts that are tuned specifically for the desktop, meaning Mac and Windows, different layouts that are tuned specifically for the iPad, a separate set of layouts that are tuned for the iPhone, and finally, a fourth set of layouts that are tuned for WebDirect. Now, why is this? Well, the desktop is the largest and most powerful client in the FileMaker product line. The iPad screen has actually been optimized for the iPad. And Nicholas has gone about redesigning this and restructuring it to take advantage of some of the capabilities within the FileMaker platform. The iPhone, once again, takes advantage of the screen real estate space that you see on the iPhone, and the layouts that are marked as web are specific for WebDirect. And the reason that these are set up this way is that they are simplified in a number of ways and made as light as possible because of the performance limitations within the WebDirect technology that's part of the FileMaker 13 platform. I'm back on the desktop detail screen here, and I want to point out that it's easy enough to add new fields here. That's pretty straightforward. I can go to File, down to Manage, over to Database, and say that I had a new field that I wanted to connect here. Say I wanted to track the number of employees that were part of this contacts company. I could simply type it down here under Field Name, specify the kind of field that I'm looking at, whether it's text, number, date, time, container, calculation, summary, any of these types of things. I'm just going to keep it as text for right now. I'm going to say Create and say OK. It's simple enough to grab that field and put it on screen and reorganize things as we go. I'm going to go to Layout mode and edit the layout. I can press that button right here. I can put my mouse right over the bottom of the layout and drag it down and make the layout a little bit larger. I'm going to hold down my Command key on my keyboard, select this right here and just move this down. And then I'm going to grab Field Drag Tool right here, and I'm going to drag down a new field here. And I'm going to say that's the number of employees at this company. And I can say that I need my label right there. And I'm running out of room, so maybe I'll abbreviate this just a little bit. And so we've added a field within our database. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to add a brand new field to this database. It's pretty straightforward. No big deal. But I want to talk about some of the things that are specifically designed into this database to make it cool. First off, I want to show you that if you go into Find mode, the layout seems to change. I was talking to Nick, and the first thing I thought, well, maybe he changed layouts, because there's script triggers that allow us to change layouts, and there's some advanced capabilities within FileMaker 13 that allow us to do things like that. And he goes, well, no, there's no scripts that have been activated, and we're on the same layout. And I go, aha, that's very clever. And what he has done, there's a single slide panel right here. Now, normally when you think about slide panels, you see dots on the slide panel, and there's multiple slide panels, and you click on them to flip between panels, i.e. kind of like pages, but they call them panels in FileMaker 13. So what's with the idea of using a single panel? Well, what you can do with this panel is actually give it the attribute of hiding. So I click over here, right here, I bring my inspector on screen right here, and I can actually say, get window mode equals 1. It says hide the object when the mode is 1. Well, mode 1 is find mode. So when this object here, the slide panel, sees that the mode is 1, it's going to hide itself. Well, browse mode itself is not equal to 1. Browse mode is 0. Well, why do we do it this way? Well, it's really simple. By doing it this way, everything that you drop on here will be hidden automatically, because when the slide panel is hidden, everything that's on it will be hidden as well. As you can see, all the objects here are attached to this slide panel. So you ask the question, why don't you go to each object and tell each object to hide on the slide panel? Well, then you'd be telling all these separate objects to hide. And that requires FileMaker to perform lots of extra calculations. Every time you put an extra hiding calculation in here, FileMaker has to do extra processing. Now, maybe in FileMaker Pro that's not such a big deal, but over a wide area network, especially with FileMaker Go, and maybe even more so with FileMaker WebDirect, you want to minimize all the extra processing that goes on with your FileMaker client. So by doing the calculation once here with your slide panel, all the objects that are attached to this slide panel inherit the same hidden object behavior. Pretty slick. So that's one. Additionally, over here, there are additional isEmpty calculations right here to determine if these values right here are empty, and if they are, not to show anything. Now, if we go back to browse mode up here, I say exit layout mode and I go back to browse mode, I start to put my information here, right? I start putting my information here, and as we do that, it starts to fill in the information over here. And if I actually go in and I start putting email, right, and I click out, it starts to dynamically build the information over here on the left side. Now, as you can see, we have some dynamic content popping up here. Pretty straightforward. If I click this, it'll pop up the website. That's pretty slick. But in a lot of database systems, including even my own FM Starting Point, we put the links over here so you can just click here and activate it. So why create this section over here entirely? What was the design thought process behind that? Well, it's real simple and it's really clever. FileMaker actually has a minimum window size when you minimize the windows. If I click this resize button right here, FileMaker will resize the window down to its minimum window size. Now, the minimum window size width is 300 pixels. And conveniently enough, Nicholas Hunter and the crew at FileMaker knew that. And so that's exactly how wide this section is right here. They designed this so you could roll this section down right here, leave this open, and still have access to the screen right here, still be able to flip records like this, and have it largely minimized, only taking up 300 pixels on the side. That's a very subtle kind of capability within FileMaker, one that I hadn't even really thought about using or even leveraging, but it is clever. Of course, if you try to manually grab and drag and make it small, FileMaker does restrict the minimum size down to 300. That's something that cannot be altered by the developer. It's just the way it is. FileMaker is hard-coded with that minimum size. Nicholas asked that I point out a couple other things here real quick that are kind of important. First off is that if you notice that when we go to find mode, certain buttons disappear. And why is this? Well, the reason is that you can't really send out an email to a person when you're in find mode. it doesn't really make any sense. In old versions of FileMaker, the buttons will still be there. In fact, if you don't build your database with the new object hidden capability that we just showed you, buttons are generally going to be visible when in find mode. But some buttons really shouldn't be visible. If I click on this button right here, once again we're using this get function, get window mode. We've also checked off apply in find mode. That way the buttons that really shouldn't be activated when in find mode are not available to the user to click. Now the alternative back in the old days was actually to write within the scripts of these buttons trap to make sure they're not activating the script by accident within find mode. That's kind of a backwards way of doing things. Really, it's better that the button was never visible in the first place to confuse the user. And if the button's never there in the first place, then you don't have to trap to make sure it was never run for a situation where it's never visible. So it's much simpler all the way around using FileMaker 13. Now there's two additional areas that are good to know and understand within this solution. First off, there's a little bit of sophistication going on with these fields right here. If I go to browse mode and look right here, say I get rid of job title right here, and I delete and get rid of this. Now watch over here. Notice how things are sliding up? Well, these fields over here, there's a little bit of sophistication going on here. In fact, it's actually probably above the heads of most basic initial developers to understand how this was written. I'm going to drop back to layout mode real quick. I can see that these fields are called side placeholder. I'm going to go to File, Manage, Database. I'm going to look at my side placeholders over here. You're going to see this calculation function right here. It's got a let function in here. It's a little bit on the deep end for most basic users. I'm not going to sit here and explain to you how this works, but just to point out the fact that things in here evaluate whether those values are empty or not, and then those values slide up. So it's a little bit on the deep side, but feel free to tear this apart and learn how this works. It's a very slick solution. The same thing was going on over here in list view. If I go to list view right here, Nicholas has gone out of his way to put as many of the dynamic links in the list view as possible. That way you actually don't have to go back to the detail page to get to this information right here. If you're on list view, you can get to your dynamic links for FaceTime, for a personal email address, for an office email. All these types of dynamic links are automatically formatted and labeled based upon those calculations you just saw. As you see my record up here, there's not a lot of labels up here with a lot of depth. Also keep in mind on the Windows platform, it's smart enough to understand that this will be actually Skype and not FaceTime, which is interesting. It actually does a platform check to determine if you're using Skype or FaceTime. So that's kind of slick too. There's been a lot of thought process that's gone into these starter solutions. And there's a lot to learn from them. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the maps piece over here. Now the maps piece has got a little bit of sophistication to it. There's actually a custom function in here, and in order to play with the custom function, you're going to need to have FileMaker Pro Advanced. Now you can still use this solution and do a lot of customization. If you actually want to go File, Manage, Custom Functions, you have to have FileMaker Pro Advanced like I have right here. Then specifically, you're going to look for this GetMap right here. This is a custom function in here that's all set up. And specifically what it allows the map to do is provide the proper URL to Google to get the map location for the address. Additionally, based upon certain empty values that you'll see right here, it'll use different zoom values to zoom in on your address, city, state, zip, and country. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's talk about Nicholas Hunter. He's at 5201 Patrick Henry Drive, and that's Santa Clara, California. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Okay? Now that zooms in right down to the detail here, no problem. I can click right here, and it actually brings it up on Google Maps. And there's the actual building right there. In fact, if I want to see a street view, there's a street view of the building right there. Pretty slick. Now, what if I don't actually have the address? What if I just have Santa Clara, California? Well, what it does, that custom function saw that we were missing the address, but we had a city and a state. So it isolates the actual specific city, provides the proper zoom for us, and shows that we're looking at a city that's in the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area within California. Now, what if we don't have the city? We just have a state. Then we're looking at the state of California right here. Pretty straightforward. And if we don't have California, then we just have the United States. But it could be any country at all, right? So it's a customized, flexible, actually almost intelligent URL that gives us a map that's as appropriate as possible. Very cool. Now let's say that we actually have Nick's address. We're going to have a meeting. Okay, so there's our meeting. It's getting all set up, ready to go. And I want to send an email out to confirm the meeting, and I want to include this picture right here in here. How do I do that? Well, we can send an email out, but what's slick about it is that the folks at FileMaker have wired it up so it actually effectively takes a screenshot right here of this map and glues it in as an attachment to this email. That is super, super cool. How does this work? Well, the short version is that you need to take apart the script here to understand how it works. I told Nicholas today he had to comment his scripts a little better because this was a little on the dicey side. First off, right here, this right here checks to make sure that we have a functional email somehow, and we're not running WebDirect. The second thing is that we run a command called insert from URL. Now the insert from URL is actually inserting the same URL that's driving the web viewer into an actual container field. So if you could understand this from a conceptual standpoint, we're taking this web viewer, which is basically a little web browser, and we're running an insert from URL, which allows us to take a URL from any web page and stick it into a container field. Now we're not seeing that container field on screen here. If we actually wanted to actually see that on screen, we probably could bring that up on screen and show it to us. Let me stick the container on here so you can see it real quick. Map from URL container. I'm going to make it big right here. I'll get rid of it in a second, but I just want to take a quick look-see at it. So this script step right here, as you can see, is going to effectively set this URL into here, or effectively does a copy and paste for all practical purposes. Next, we're going to set up a variable called $path, which is a local variable, and we use the getTemporaryPath, which is a hidden directory both on FileMaker Go and FileMaker Pro, and we set all that into $path. Then we're able to actually export the field contents out of this container field to $path. So we're basically exporting this image to the hidden temporary path. Then we basically do a send email command, and when we send an email, we can actually specify that there's an attachment, and that attachment is simply $path. Well, we already had $path because we used it to export the image in the first place. All we have to do is re-reference the same path for it to go and retrieve that exported image. It's really slick and really straightforward. Now I know this is a little bit on the deep end if you're a newer FileMaker developer, but there are a lot of good lessons to be learned from tearing apart and learning from the Contact Starter solution. Now if you're hopelessly lost or you want to learn more about the FileMaker platform, I want to encourage you to check out our FileMaker Pro video training course, which we've made available, which digs into all these topics in much greater detail. We also have a separate training series on FileMaker Go if you're just trying to focus on learning how to build mobile applications using the FileMaker platform. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the direction and the thought process behind the FileMaker Contact Starter solution that's part of the FileMaker 13 installation for both Pro and FileMaker Go.